The fact that a prenup has been requested doesn't mean that the love has gone away. It just means that that person has something that they probably want to protect.
Hey everyone, I'm Meredith Shirey. I'm a licensed psychotherapist specializing in relationship issues.
And I'm Isaiah Vallejo-Justi, a divorce attorney.
This is a podcast about filling in the gaps of our relationships, the deeply personal choices we make for our families and ourselves,
and the impact our actions have on the rest of our lives. This is Love Me or Leave Me.
Hey everyone, welcome back. On a previous episode, we introduced everyone to the concept of prenuptial agreements, but we realized that we didn't have enough time to really go through it and give it the credit it should for such a complicated topic. And Isaiah and I, even prepping for this episode, I had no idea how complex and nuanced prenuptial relationships are. And so we thought it'd be really helpful to give you some information about that in case you're considering a prenuptial agreement.
Prenuptial agreement, I guess the first question you would ask yourself is, well, what is a prenuptial agreement?
Yeah.
So we can break that down kind of really quickly. Nuptials obviously refer to your wedding, before. So it's an agreement that you enter into before your marriage, which will govern how a divorce would go when it comes to the finances.
Is it that prenups really only apply to financial aspects or to assets? Does it apply to any other area of marriage?
Generally speaking, they are just really dealing with finances. It's against public policy, for example, to deal with children or child support, things of that nature. So really you're talking about what assets you have or you're going to be earning during the marriage itself.
Are there any trends? People maybe who are more likely to get a prenup, people who would benefit from those things?
Usually you'll see somebody getting a prenup because, they either have a business or some assets that they want to protect, maybe some family money, maybe their family wants something to get a prenup to protect the money they're going to inherit or have otherwise received already from their families. So that's usually what you will see. Sometimes you'll see none of that, just people believing that prenups deal with things equitably. When they want to have things very equitable in their marriage, and so they'll use a prenup for that reason.
And now with a younger millennial generation where you have a much stronger female presence in the workforce, are you noticing any differences there? Are millennials more or less likely to get a prenup?
There are a lot of millennial prenups going around. That's definitely a trend. So I definitely have seen that. I think you could say that millennials tend to have more prenups than in previous generations. And I think there's just it's more socially acceptable now. A lot of millennials are children of divorce, and having seen how divorces worked out amongst their parents, may want agreement for that reason as well.
I love the idea of a prenup because to me, I think of it as almost like an insurance, right? You don't sign up for short or long-term disability through your job or healthcare insurance because you want to have that, but because you want to protect yourself in the event that you need it. I think for a lot of people, though, they get really scared of the concept of bringing up a prenuptial agreement because they're afraid it's going to become very adversarial.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that question all the time. How should I let him or her know that I want a prenup? And people are very concerned about that because although the stigma is lessening, there's certainly a stigma out there with respect to getting prenups, or people have conceptions about what getting a prenup means. Does that mean that you're planning for a divorce? What does that mean about what you think of our relationship and things of that matter? So yeah, absolutely. I see it a lot.
What's helpful for people to know or for you to tell them when it comes to lessening the stigma or normalizing getting a prenup?
I think what you said summarizes it best. And I've never heard somebody say the word love and prenup kind of together. Like, I love the idea of the prenup, and it being a type of insurance. That's a great way to look at it. It's like an insurance policy, and for that reason, you got to make sure it's properly drawn up and things are done properly so that you know that it's enforceable later. But yeah, absolutely. That's what I would say is the best way to put that.
So if I can give this anecdotal example, I had clients one time who ended up in my office because they were getting a prenup, and it was a lot of do you not trust me? Do you really think that I would do this to you? Are we really preparing for a divorce? But really what it was the partner who had the assets and who was pushing for the prenup had been through a very short marriage before, and also had a parent who is very absent in and out and also abusing the family and trying to financially take advantage of them. And so for that person, finances and having the security of those assets was more about saying to the partner, I want to know that you respect my need for security here. And once she understood that, she was fine with it and they could move on and happily ever after. But it took getting through all of that content to actually get to that vulnerable need that they both had.
Because I think one of the big problems that happens is one of miscommunication. When you deal with prenups, you have four people communicating with each other, and they don't necessarily all communicate in the same way, in the same manner, or they don't necessarily agree about what's being communicated. You have both parties, and then you have the attorneys on kind of on both sides. So really what I think is instructive is for the parties themselves, the couple, to have had discussions about why they want a prenup, what it is they want to protect in the prenup, and how they want to do that, so that when they go to their attorneys, they can say, well, this is what we want to do, this is how we want it drawn up, and they can stick as close to that as possible. But there's just so many different things that you can consider in a prenup that sometimes that communication can get lost in the sauce a little bit, and that can make things kind of contentious. Whereas one side is saying, well, the prenup says this, and the other side is saying, well, no, the prenup really says this. And that's a point that can really generate some real conflict. And then on top of that, you have like upcoming wedding dates, and you pick your wedding dress or you pick your tuxedo, and just the stress of getting married is stressful. So add
Right.
into that the stress of negotiating a document that feels like you're negotiating your divorce. It just can really make it very contentious. And what you want to try to do, at least what I try to do, is I try to keep it a little more even keel and try to just work through the issues together, so that the couple can focus on getting married and having fun and enjoying themselves, and let the attorneys kind of do the work of making sure that they've protected their clients and accomplished the goals that they want.
From your perspective, it sounds like you see the role of the attorneys is to really try to clarify those details, but to also do your best as much as you can to preserve the couple in terms of not turning them against one another if you can. Does it make a difference what kind of attorney you go to for this? It sounds like this is a pretty complicated, dense document that you really need someone who understands this to help you through.
You definitely want somebody who has substantial work in both drafting prenups and in handling divorces, because then that person has seen what the results of a prenup could actually look like. So you don't want somebody who just doesn't do that, because in my opinion anyway, you want somebody who's going to know, all right, well, if we put these provisions in an agreement, this is what the court is going to do with those provisions, or this is what it actually means in reality. Because prenups, at least in the state of New York, are documents which the courts very much respect and very much enforce. And so you don't want any unintended consequences in your prenup. So, for example, you could say my business is going to be separate property. That's a common one. And that the income that I receive from separate property is going to remain separate property. And then there's usually other terms in the prenuptial agreements whereby they say, well, anything you purchase with your separate property, it remains a separate property. So now you've set up a situation where you have no income outside of your separate property. And anything you purchase with your separate property income, which is from your business, likewise is a separate property. So you may have basically just purchase every single thing as your separate property, like the TV you purchase as your separate property, the painting you purchase, that's your separate property. But maybe you didn't intend that. Maybe your fiance didn't understand that. So really what you want to make sure is that both parties understand what they're signing and agree to that.
And especially with so many startups and people who have more of an entrepreneurial spirit, I'm sure that that's something that has to be taken into account. So if I was getting married and I came to your office and I said, Isaiah, I built my therapy practice before I met this person. It's my only source of income. I want to make sure that I'm protecting my business and my income, but I also want to be fair. So if we both have jobs and there's a separate property, but I assume we both have bought things for the house and that kind of thing. Like I would never want it to be so uneven or that this somehow again work to my disproportionate advantage in some way. So how can you find a way to make that more even?
Well, fair, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. So it depends upon what it is that you want to accomplish. I'm not here to say that you should do this one way or you should do this another way. I'm here to say these are what your options are, and how do you want to take this? What is it that you want to do? What is it that you're trying to protect? What do you not want to protect? Do you not want it so that all the income you earn during your marriage is your separate property? If you don't want that, then we can speak about that. If you do want that, then we can accomplish that as well. It all depends upon what it is that you want and what it is that your fiance wants as well.
I'm actually going to really care about making sure that my fiance, again, my imaginary man over here, gets equal treatment, that I'm not, that I'm trying to kind of pull one over on him. Whereas if you wait till the divorce, no one's going to be thinking about that. They're in it for themselves because you're not in a good place and you're not exactly looking to throw the other person a bone if you're if you're in the divorce.
I mean, and that's exactly why these agreements have to be so carefully drawn up, because I always like to compare it to a will. When you're dealing with a will, in the event that the will is enforced, that means your spouse died. But that also means that, usually speaking, more or less, the relationship has gone the way you thought, right? You were married until the end. And so now you get everything that you're entitled to under the will. And this is a sad event that the spouse has died, but it's not necessarily a sad event in that the relationship has terminated in a way that it was negative or that you did not expect, which is the case in a divorce. With a prenup, it's the opposite of that. Now you're protecting yourself against somebody who you loved at the time who's becoming adversarial. And so that's why it's really important that these things are drawn up in advance and with a lot of forethought. Now it's a different mindset. What are we going to do in the event that we get divorced? And that question is heavy. The way you think you'll act in a divorce is not the way you're going to act in a divorce. It just isn't, because you're not under that type of stress. You can't possibly foresee what it was like to, let's say, live with a person and be married to them for a number of years, maybe even start a family, and then have that person either do something or you've done something to that person that causes a divorce. You can't possibly foresee how you're going to react, let alone how your spouse is going to react in that high tense situation. So in that way, prenups can act to provide some certainty as to what's going to happen. Now, with that said, prenups provide certainty with what's going to happen. So the same way on the positive side, you protect yourself, or maybe on the negative side, you are giving something that you wouldn't want to give in the event that you actually got divorced. So you really have to give these things a lot of thought.
Yeah, this sounds like a cautionary tale.
A little bit. I mean, you see both sides of that coin all the time. Really, what you want to think about is, in the worst possible case scenario, if this thing was enforced, am I okay with the terms of this agreement? Do I understand them? Have I gotten any financial exposure? Do I understand what the other person has? And at the end of the day, am I okay with this? It's value judgment that you're placing. And in my opinion, there's no really right or wrong way to say, oh, yes, this is right, or yes, this is wrong. It's really up to you.
Well, I guess in terms of these marital agreements, so I've heard of a postnup, but I don't really know what it is. What is it, and what's the difference between that and a prenup?
As prenuptials before you get married, postnuptials after you get married. You can enter into a postnuptial agreement about any of the financial issues in your marriage if you'd like, similar to the way you can do that with a prenup, but they're two very, very different documents. When it comes to prenups, the courts have held that you don't have a fiduciary duty to your fiance. But when it comes to postnups, the court has held that you have a fiduciary duty to your spouse. Now, there's been some pushback a little bit in the case law about prenups and having fiduciary duties, but for the most part, that's the case.
What does fiduciary mean?
You have a responsibility towards your spouse to do right by them.
Oh, okay. So like to be fair?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Postnups have a more stringent standard that has to be upheld. So if you've given something away in a postnup, then you technically probably should get something back for that. Whereas in a prenup, there's really not that strict of a requirement. Prenups are really going to require that they be conscionable, meaning that they're not extreme. They don't cause extreme financial hardship on somebody or something along those lines. But for the most part, New York is really going to enforce prenups. Postnups are a little harder, so you have to be careful.
Can you just talk a little bit more about that so people understand, okay, what would be one of these circumstances that would constitute this being thrown out or having to be renegotiated?
Sure. Let's say it's signed improperly is one. It has to be signed in a specific way before a notary does an acknowledgement. An attorney representing both sides can be a part of a basis to overturn a prenup, but it doesn't mean that's automatic. Things like duress, putting extreme pressure on a person, which the courts have held does not mean that your wedding date is tomorrow, because the courts have held that you don't have to get married. You can enter into a prenup the day before. You can't later say that there's been duress. So it has to be something rather extreme. Another one is, mental incompetency or something like that as well. But these things are extreme things. So really, it's not the things that you're going to see on a day-to-day basis when it comes to a prenup. So you want to make sure that you know what you're entering into, because, there's a pretty high likelihood that it's going to be enforced.
This is been incredibly helpful, all of this information. Is there anything else you think that we should know about prenups before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would say that look, a prenup's not the end of the world. There are thousands of prenups that get negotiated every single day. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to get divorced, and it doesn't mean that you're going to stay married for the rest of your life. Let's be honest, we live in the 21st century nowadays, and the divorce rate is somewhere around 50%. I wouldn't say that, hey, got into a prenup and that means I'm automatically getting divorced. You're getting married. At the end of the day, you might get divorced. These things happen. Okay, so I wouldn't look at a prenup or somebody requesting a prenup as being the worst thing in the world. You know, what you have to be is honest in your communications as to why you want the prenup. And you'll be surprised that more often than not, when that honesty happens and when those honest discussions occur, at that point, the other side usually gets it, like your clients do.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, remember, the person asking for the prenup asked you to marry him or her, or the reverse happened. At the end of the day, you guys have agreed to marry each other. So obviously there should be some love there. The fact that a prenup has been requested doesn't mean that the love has gone away. It just means that that person has something that they probably want to protect. So just have a conversation about it. It's not the worst thing in the world.
I love that. I think that that's so important, right? It doesn't diminish or negate love or trust, but it's usually saying, I need to protect me, not that I don't trust you, but I need this for me. If you think about it like you time, or when you're taking time for yourself, because this is obviously in the age of COVID, something every couple's had to negotiate. You know, when you're taking time for yourself, your me time, you're not leaving your spouse, right? It's not because you need time away for your spouse. You just need time to recharge yourself. It's not that I want to hurt you or withhold from you or that I don't trust you. It's just that I have a need to protect me. And if I'm going to ask you for that, I need to be really honest and vulnerable about what that is so that you don't feel like it's because I don't trust you.
I think that's the perfect way to put that. And with that, I think, this is a good place to end this episode. And next week, we have a great guest coming on. And for prenups, we're going to talk about sex. We have Melissa Pennica coming on. She's a licensed marriage family therapist, and she's going to talk to us about sex and relationships. So we'll see you next time.
Love Me or Leave Me is a podcast production of the Board brand. This podcast is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical or legal advice and is not a substitute for professional consultation, diagnoses, or treatment. Always follow up with a licensed attorney or healthcare professional who can address your specific needs. Thanks for listening.